Alrighty. So thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate everybody's time who is able to jump on the call. We are going to be talking through our new community vulnerability assessment tool. And we will be going through the tool itself, as well as, just kind of details about how we came to the new tool. So kind of the purpose of us joining today is we'll be introducing the new screening tool. We're going to talk a little bit about why and how the tool was developed. Um, Really, the purpose of the tool and of today is to make sure that we can ensure consistent trauma-informed use across providers and across the community of the tool itself. And then how the tool is going to help support the prioritization of housing services for those who we're seeing with the highest need and who are the most vulnerable in our community. So what you will be getting out of the tool, you will gain today an understanding of the tool's purpose and design, also the skills needed to engage your clients in a respectful conversational manner using the tool, which all of you are already engaging in working with your clients in a respectful, trauma-informed way. So we're, of course, going to be folding that into what this training looks like and how to utilize the tool as more of a conversational tool versus just kind of going down a list of questions. Many of you, of course, are already familiar with this method, so we'll kind of talk through that. You'll get to practice applying the tool. We're going to do some breakout sessions a little later where you guys will work amongst yourselves to practice using the tool. And then clarity on how the tool informs like our prioritization process. We'll talk a little bit about case conferencing at the end. As I said, we're going to kind of overview the new tool. We have providers with us today, leadership from Lois Ann's Hope House, from Micah, and from Empower House that are going to talk us through the questions themselves, knowing what you guys are seeing on the front lines and how to really utilize that. Then we'll do the breakout sessions, and then we'll do some wrap up with Q&A, make space for any questions that you all may have kind of as we go through that. So why are we creating and utilizing a new tool? So all of you that are working with clients currently will know you're currently utilizing the VI SPDAT. We've had a lot of limitations with that tool. We've engaged in a lot of conversations throughout the community for many years about kind of how to adjust that tool, what we can do to make sure that tool is more equitable. And so through a lot of those conversations, we recognize, of course, the need for a more equity-focused and trauma-informed assessment. We've taken a lot of feedback from you all of how can we better identify client needs and make sure that our prioritization of clients is really accurate. And really what we're seeing is while the tool captures a lot of data and a lot of information, we're still seeing a lot of folks that are not rising to the top of the list that may have more need. And so we began engaging in this process in late 2024 through our coordinated entry working group. So that is essentially how we began the process of taking all that feedback, looking at what other communities are doing, and trying to develop a tool that is going to better fit the needs of the clients that you all are working with throughout our community. The development of this tool was kind of a joint process between that coordinated entry working group. Many of you attended many of those meetings while those were ongoing. We really wanted to make sure that we're incorporating you all as frontline staff, your recommendations, the issues that you were seeing with the VI SPDAT, how that was impacting your work, and how we can make a new tool more applicable to what you all need on the front line. So we took feedback from providers. We did this in collaboration with just best practices and resources. We looked at many different communities and the tools that they are using and found that there really has been no good one-size-fits-all tool that communities are utilizing. in place of the VI SPDAT, which is, part of why so many communities are still utilizing it, even despite the issues that have been kind of brought up from that. And so we kind of embarked on this journey, all of us together. And thank you all for all of your input and your time that went into this process. We know it's been very tedious, lots of meetings, lots of revisions to kind of synthesize all that down into the tool that we're going to be talking about today. So we tried to pick the most effective parts from the various communities tools that we looked at. We looked at probably 7 or 8 different tools, pulled things from those, conglomerated them all together, put it through the ringer with everyone's feedback that many of you, contributed to over the last number of months. And so now we are at the pilot testing and revision stage. That's kind of the breakdown of how we got to where we are. We wanted to make everybody aware and make sure everybody's on the same page with that process as well. So we're going to be talking about how to use the tool today, and we're going to have leadership from the providers, as I mentioned, walk you through the tool itself. We're going to go through each section, make sure everybody's really comfortable with how to really utilize that. We also have a set of guiding questions for each section that are included in the tool, as well as kind of like a conversational guide that can help if there are things that you want to kind of tease out additional information for. So we'll talk through kind of documentation expectations, the scoring overview. We're going to talk about that and how to really utilize it as a conversational guide, not as like a rigid script that you're just asking questions. Um, so I am going to pull up the tool itself, and at this point, I'm going to pass it off to the providers to talk through the tool, and then we'll do those breakout sessions and kind of jump into that too. Everyone should have a copy of the guiding questions in their email as well. So I will go ahead and pull up the tool now, and I will pass it to Kate and Megan and the folks in Empower House that are going to go through some questions. All right. Is everybody able to see the tool just before we jump in?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, I will pass it off to you guys.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Thank you everyone so much for being on the call. I know that there was a rapid rehousing training yesterday as well, so there's lots of training this week and we really appreciate your time. Megan did a great job of talking about the development of this tool, and several of you were a part of that process, so we're very appreciative of it. I think especially as we are approaching a time where so many folks are seeking our services, we really want to make sure that we are prioritizing effectively with what interventions are available with limited capacity, and that those who are most vulnerable are the ones who are accessing our housing interventions. So we're really excited that we have a more equitable tool that has input from all of the providers who are working with different populations to make sure that we're gauging those things effectively. This tool is really moving away from the yes, no VI SPDAT questions that we are used to. And we're moving towards a conversation that ultimately really draws from your professional expertise. And so our role is really not just to record answers, but ultimately we want to hear people's stories. And we want to understand their context and how those experiences really shape their outcomes. And so we trust your judgment on those things. And I think that this tool is flexible and will represent that in the process. So as we work through it, these questions are not meant to be asked word for word or verbatim. They are conversation starters. So please feel free to adapt them based on the rapport that you have with clients and the flow of discussion. You are going to have some people that want to tell you their whole life story. You have others that might be a little bit more reluctant or hesitant to engage in the process, and that is normal. But please feel free to adapt as you are going throughout it. Or if you have any other kind of information or context on the client prior to going through the assessment. So a couple of things just about completing it, leading into, having this conversation. Like Megan said, we really want to make sure we have a trauma-informed and strengths-based approach, which you will probably hear us say a lot in this conversation, and acknowledge that some clients might be hesitant to engage in services. And that could be for a few reasons. They might have had a service history where they have a sense of distrust, or they've had negative experiences with systems. Or it can depend on when you are actually completing this assessment. So for some folks, it might be at the first point of contact. And for others, you might have gotten to know the client a little bit. And so you might have a stronger rapport or trust that's built with them. We also want to make sure that we're ensuring a level of privacy. So creating a safe environment, something that is comfortable. People are going to be sharing really intimate details about their life. And so we want to respect that. And we also want to allow for participants to be able to help guide that conversation, because there are going to be challenging moments and difficult information that they're sharing. So we want them to be able to go at their own pace and really set the tone that we are here and we are going through this to connect them to services and to provide them support. So if you hit sensitive topics, there's a lot of opportunity to normalize some of these circumstances. So for example, I understand how difficult decisions can be when you're in survival mode, or several of the folks that we work with have had issues with income, things like that, that are normalizing some of these situations, because often there can be a sense of shame or guilt that's associated with them. Additionally, at the onset, we want to make sure we are communicating that this information is confidential, and folks have the opportunity to decline to share information. They are in charge of that and they have autonomy. So we want to make sure that we're building that trust at the onset, that they only have to answer what they feel comfortable with sharing. Outside of that, if you want to scroll down a little bit, Megan, there are going to be at the bottom of each section, you can stay there, but there will be case notes in every section. Those are really internal. That is a space for case managers to use to write relevant information that can ultimately be used during case conferencing and prioritization meetings. So as you're going through each section, write any pertinent information that you receive that you feel will be helpful when we are making decisions with their housing, and what services or programs that they might qualify for, so that we can communicate that during the prioritization process. So we're going to start off with income. And this was chosen as the first section very intentionally. It tends to be a bit more straightforward, and it's not a super heavy topic to start off with. And so we wanted something that was a little more simple to engage folks with, that wasn't relying on a lot of really deeply personal kinds of things. So on here, you'll see there's a score 1 through 5. 1 is going to be the least risk factors, the least vulnerability, and then 5 is going to be our incredibly vulnerable folks that have a lot of risk factors associated with whatever section that you're working through. There are indicators, and these are specific signs or maybe circumstances that you'll observe or hear from the client that will match the score. So for example, when they're saying things like they have no income, there's active CPS involvement, maybe they're working part-time, that is what will help you identify where the person falls on this scale. And then the risk summary is like your big picture takeaway. It condenses all of the indicators into like a snapshot of the client's level of vulnerability in that area. So on income specifically, when we say that, we are not just talking about a paycheck. We're looking at the full picture of how someone is meeting their basic needs. And so that could be through employment or earned income. It could be public benefits. Maybe it's informal work, or help from a family member or friend. And often we know it is a combination of all of these things. And so we want to normalize that there are a wide range of income situations. And a lot of the folks that we're working with may have long periods without income. It could be informal work, and it's okay to acknowledge that openly. This is also a great opportunity to identify strengths. So as you're going through and getting this information from someone, maybe you find that they have always found a way to make ends meet. or maybe they've built really creative workarounds to stretch very limited resources. Recognizing their resourcefulness helps to shift the tone of that conversation from something that's deficit based to now a problem solving and collaborative approach. Um, and so you can see on here, it goes 1 through 5. One is going to be stable income. That's going to be your folks that are probably working full time, or they have very consistent and reliable income that they have maintained for quite some time. They're receiving regular paychecks, and their income is covering most of their, expenses. So transportation, childcare, and things like that. And there's no risk of a job loss or a benefit that's being cut in the future. And then it goes to modest or intermittent income. So that can be folks that might be working part-time. They might have some of their expenses covered, but they're falling short, or they're one financial situation away from that changing. If they were to have a car repair or an unexpected medical expense. Other things to maybe ask is, do you get paid if your child gets sick? Do you have to call out of work for those things? All of that helps build a picture holistically of what that client is going through and how income can impact their ability to maintain housing in the future. The other thing I will share with this is, as you're going through it, our purpose with the assessment is for housing. However, this is a great tool for case managers, just to be able to know what other resources that you can connect people to. And so you can note that in that case management notes section, but as you're working through it, there are naturally a lot of things that are going to come up that will influence housing. It will demonstrate their barriers in the process of obtaining it, but it's also going to allow you to know what other kinds of services. Is it working on a resume? Is it applying for benefits that you can connect them to support their long-term stability? So 3 is unstable or inadequate income. That could be working on jobs like yard work, moving help. There's really no like set schedule for them, and they rely heavily on public benefits for food, childcare, or things like that. And they might also face significant barriers to work. So think about if they have documentation issues, do they have childcare that's secured? If they have a disability or a medical condition. And then 4 is no reliable income. Consistently without income. There is no form, they're not connected to benefits or anything like that. And they don't have any kind of steady support. And 5 is going to be our most vulnerable folks. So they not only don't have income, but they really don't have any other supports in place. And so they are not connected with maybe friends or family that can help financially. They are not meeting their basic needs. So things for food, hygiene, and stuff like that. So as you're talking with folks, look at the full picture of income. There are going to be people that might come in and it's okay, they're working currently. How long have they maintained that job? Look at their work history over the last few years. Is it something that's consistent? Are they continuing to go in and out of employment? And why? Is there some sort of medical condition that's not being addressed? There are going to be a lot of other questions that kind of come up as you're working through each of these sections. And I recommend really using some of that information as you go down so that you're not consistently having to ask the same information, but you're drawing from what you've already got when you're going through the other sections. In terms of the guiding questions, again, this is just to help you start the conversation. There are always going to be other things that come up. Some of these things may not apply to folks that you are working with. And then Megan also sent out just before the meeting, kind of just a Word document with all of the questions on there that has a lot of great material. So have you lost your income recently? Do you ever go without income for days or weeks at a time? Do health or caregiving or transportation get in the way of you receiving income? We want to make sure that we're using language that is easy to understand for folks. We're not using a lot of technical or legal terms. We're really just trying to get that full picture of how their income has been with consistency. Is it stable? And are their basic needs being met? Are there any questions about that? Or is there any other insight from Micah or Empower House that they'd like to share? Okay, then we can hand it off to Empower House for safety.
Empower House folks, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me, Megan?
Yes, we can hear you now, Daphne.
Yes, sorry. So I couldn't get in. So Rose and I are both in on the same, I guess, link. So that's why it's confusing.
Yeah, no problem. We will pass it off to you all.
Okay. So in the tool, it basically the question about, are you safe or, do you need assistance? So we wanted to talk a little bit about what that looks like for people who are experiencing domestic violence. And I know that you guys, refer them over to us. So thank you for that. So what they're going to do is when you say, "Are you safe?" A lot of times what happens is if they call us, we listen for different cues as to really are they safe or not, because sometimes there are abusers making them call to get resources, meaning they need shelter or hotel money or whatever that looks like. So a lot of times we'll hear them whispering. So basically what we do is when we hear whispers, we'll say, "Are you safe?" And they're like, "Well, not right now. Do you need me to call 911?" So that's kind of what we do when we talk about safety, because even though she's saying she's safe, we have to kind of take her word for it, but we can also have a continued conversation to say, "I understand you're whispering, are you unsafe?" And then that's when we go into, Empower House mode to say, "Do you need me to call 911? Are you able to get out okay?" And then we kind of drive the conversation and asking, "Am I on speakerphone?" before we start asking a bunch of questions. If she's not safe, she wants us to call 911, we can go ahead and do that. So that's kind of when that question, "Are you safe?" Because if she's calling and she's not safe, it's probably not going to be a real good idea to say, "Okay, well, hang up and call Empower House." So helping them with that original safety call to see if they need 911 or are they safe to continue on with the assessment. Was that clear?
Yeah, thank you so much, Daphne. We appreciate you walking everybody through that. And as you all can see, the safety section is kind of broken into two different categories. So we have the intimate partner violence, which would kind of trigger that referral or that connection with Empower House. As Daphne said, making sure that safety is really at the front of that conversation to make sure that your client is in a position where they can really be candid about some of these things. This section also encompasses just their safety overall. So whether it is a potentially a family violence situation or just a situation where your client is in an environment where they are not currently safe. And you will see in the tool the distinction of those things from intimate partner violence to make sure that they're being connected with the correct resource. As you guys can see, there are additionally questions related to physical violence or control by people who are not intimate partners. This could be, right, anyone that your clients happen to be staying with. It could be vulnerability of physical safety in an encampment situation or just being on the street. There's a lot of varied reasons why folks can be experiencing those life threatening situations. And so you'll see that distinction within this element of the tool as well. You do have the case manager notes, as Kate mentioned before, on all of the sections. And then the guiding questions here at the bottom for safety and intimate partner violence. And so it's going to ask some of those questions that Daphne was talking about related to how are you safe here in this moment? But then the questions also help guide you to, even if you're safe right now in this moment, how can we make sure we're evaluating your vulnerability when it comes to physical and controlling behaviors outside of where you are right now. So there are some additional questions in that guiding question interview as well, to make sure that we're encompassing kind of that broad spectrum when it comes to safety. Any questions on that portion, or questions for Empower House folks in particular about maybe how to phrase some of these? We did receive a lot of input and guidance from the Empower House frontline staff and leadership to make sure that these questions are in line with those trauma-informed approaches that Kate was referencing at the outset. Okay, great. Well, I will pass it off back to Kate for the legal involvement and history portion.
Sure. So for this section, folks might be a little bit hesitant to share this information just because of a fear of stigma, discrimination, or potential legal consequences. And so we really want to make sure we lead with transparency, explain why we're asking, that ultimately our goal is to understand their barriers to housing and connect them to services, and also reminding people that this information will stay confidential. And so when we talk about legal involvement, we are not here to investigate, judge, report. This is ultimately for us to be better informed in what housing situations that folks might qualify for. We have all had situations where we're working with someone and we say that person's going to need a private landlord. And it's usually based off of maybe there's something on their record and there's an issue with their income. And so ultimately, legal involvement can mean several different things that are encompassed in here. So that could be past arrest, probation and parole, it could be eviction history, if they have active warrants, or CPS or APS involvement. You will see some of these things reflected in other areas of the tool as well. So again, you're kind of building off of the information as you're receiving it and working your way down. Now, all of these systems can have varying levels of impact on someone's life. So consider the recency and the severity when you were working through this section. For example, has it prevented them from getting housing? Has it cost them a job? Is it a legal situation that is still ongoing? Are they connected to resources if that's a need? Even if someone has a significant legal history, maybe they've built a strong support system. They've made progress that reduces the current impact. And so the goal is we don't want to just have their record and list out the charges, but we want to understand what the real world effect is and their ability to obtain or maintain housing long term. So again, it's 1 through 5 on here. Your low risk is going to be folks that really have no involvement with any sort of criminal justice system, whether it's CPS, APS, they haven't had any issues with obtaining housing or employment because of a legal history. Mild risk might be they have some misdemeanor charges. They're maybe from a couple years ago. Potentially there's a prior eviction, but they've paid it off. But there's no legal, warrants or cases that they're working through. A moderate risk is going to be maybe they're on probation for a nonviolent offense. They're compliant with the terms. Maybe it's impacted their housing to some capacity. They've lost out on opportunities because of their criminal history. And then your high risk is folks that really were probably released from incarceration recently. It could be that they have multiple eviction judgments for several thousands of dollars, or they are struggling to meet parole requirements because of their housing status. And then severe history is going to be if they have a long history of incarceration, maybe it's an active warrant, they're on the sex offender registry, chronic evictions, which we see a lot, where folks may have lost every housing opportunity, which is going to be really challenging to find a new one. Or it could be they currently have an open case with CPS and an imminent risk of removal of the children. Again, there are several guiding questions on here. We want to make sure that we are not necessarily using legal terms. This is a great opportunity for you to connect them to other services when applicable, whether that's reentry services or other employment resources. Again, we know that these things are closely tied to housing and someone's ability to obtain a permanent option. And so all of that would be reflected in here. Are there any questions regarding that or comments from other folks on the call? Okay, then we can move on to parenting. So for parenting, this section is going to include households that have children in their care. It could be also children that they have lost custody of, or who might be residing with a relative or a family member, or friend somewhere else, and those who are pregnant. So when we talk about parenting or caregiving in the context of this assessment, we are really looking for the safety, stability, and support that is available for children or the unborn child. So this means things like, where are children living? Is the custody stable? Do they have legal custody? And whether the basic needs like education, healthcare, food security are being met. We also really want to dive into what support systems are available, whether that's formal or informal for the caregiver. I will say this is one of the more sensitive subjects in the assessment because it touches directly on a person's identity as a parent and some of their deepest concerns from their children. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're working through this. Parents or caregivers really can carry a deep sense of shame or guilt about their housing status and their ability to meet their children's needs. And so they also might have a really huge fear of judgment or it triggering a call to Child Protective Services, and simply just for admitting that they are struggling with some of these things. I would say also there are past negative experiences that this will bring up if someone has been involved with social services, maybe they've had a child removed in the past, or other systems that might just amplify that fear and cause them to be a bit more guarded and cautious with what information they are sharing with you. And so again, we want to make sure that we are doing this as trauma-informed as possible, creating a safe place that is private, a calm setting, and letting them know why we are asking them these questions. This is not to place any judgment. This is to connect you with services and resources that ultimately benefit the well-being of you and your children. Building trust is going to be imperative. We want to be transparent with them of what we're trying to do, that this is intended to help your family and it's not meant to punish you. Working through this section, trying very diligently to avoid any sort of judgmental language. So using more neutral and behavior-based questions rather than implying any kind of blame or inadequacy on the caregiver's behalf. So for example, can you tell me about your childcare arrangements right now, as opposed to, do you have reliable childcare? Framing the question from a different perspective can really make someone feel a bit more at ease and hopefully a bit more willing to maybe talk about some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And again, we just want to let them set the pace. So if they seem hesitant, give them the space, pause, and you can always revisit some of these things later in the conversation. Equally as important, when we're assessing risk, we also want to acknowledge their strengths and highlight the effort that folks are working towards, even if they're in challenging, circumstances. So it can be maybe the parent has really made sure that their child has gotten to school every day, despite rotating through several motels, family members' houses, or things like that. Maybe they have gotten creative in finding safe places for their kids to play. Maybe they're enrolled in, extracurricular activities. They are engaged with mental health services. There are all sorts of things that we can highlight and recognize the resilience of parents to help build trust in that process. So as you're going through this, you want to acknowledge the risk that they have while also making sure to highlight the effort that they're putting into providing for their kids, meeting their basic needs, and letting them know what other supportive services might be available to them. Um, and this will help us better determine how we can advocate for them in housing decisions. And so you'll see on here, again, it's 1 through 5. I won't go through this exhaustively, but we ultimately want to see what support does the parent have in place. Again, these things might come up in other sections. So you'll see CPS is reflected in both legal and the parenting. Use your judgment on how those things are impacted by their involvement with other systems. It can also include, do the kids have transportation set for school? Are they accessing medical care? Do they have a primary care? Have they gotten immunizations, things like that? We want to know what other supportive services that we can put in place while also acknowledging the barriers that they have in accessing some of these support systems when we are prioritizing them for housing. This also includes if someone is pregnant. So do they have access to prenatal care? Are they going to doctor's appointments? Do they have basic things they might need for the baby? Do they feel prepared or equipped for that? What are some other things that we can do? So you're taking all of that into consideration when you're making an assessment on how vulnerable that might make them in the housing process. Any questions about
Okay,
that?
can I add something to that?
Please.
Yeah, so from a Empower House standpoint, we did want to point out that a lot of times when CPS is involved, the client will be at CPS and the case manager's on the phone with them, and almost like in a forced, you know, I'm either gonna come to Empower House or they're gonna take my children. So one of the things that we're very, very clear with CPS and the client is that we don't work, for CPS, that we need to
Mhm.
have a conversation that's private. So we ask them to give the client some space and some room to be able to have a private conversation with us so that we can reassure mom that we are not, and it is not our intent to take your children. We want to be helpful. We understand that you're in a domestic violence situation. How can we be more helpful, to see that you can kind of maintain having your kids there? So,
Mhm.
that's one of the things that a lot of the times we get pulled in from CPS because it is not a safe environment for the client or the children. So I just wanted to highlight that part from an Empower House standpoint.
Yeah, that I thank you so much. That is incredibly helpful because clients do think that we are CPS. It happens to us all of the time, and we have to do a lot of education that that is not our role. If they are actively involved in CPS, we will coordinate with them. But it's important that we have our own rapport and relationship because there's automatically a distrust when they hear that term. And then it's also some education that, if we're working with someone who has an open CPS case, that doesn't necessarily mean child removal because that's what a lot of folks think it means. And our goal is, well, how can we support you in being successful, either to be reunited with your children or to make sure that we can close the CPS case and you have all of the support to be successful in that and to transition out of those services.
I want to add one thing too for this section. We are aware, of course, that not every client is going to have children or parenting or caregiving. So this will be the only section in the assessment where if they don't have any children, the score will just be zero, and it will be scored a little bit differently. So I just wanted to add that. We will be adding verbiage to the tool, kind of in its next iteration. But just so everyone knows practically, of course, like if you're not parenting, you don't have any children, like that's not going to alter the score for you, for your client. So I did just want to put like a little caveat in there for that one too. Any questions for Kate or any other folks on the parenting section? All right. Well, thank you so much, Kate. We'll pass it over to Megan Cotter for chronic health conditions.
Okay. So, one of the things I think that may not be overly obvious, but is somewhat strategic, is how these questions have been ordered. Like you said, like Kate said, the initial question at the beginning about income was, hang on just, okay. Um, um, So the questions are ordered in such a way that they start with the least invasive and move to some of the ones that could potentially be um, a little bit more sensitive. And so by now you'll have asked some questions and that by the time you get to chronic health conditions, you'll have had some time to make some observations about what people are struggling with it or not. Um, as as Peg often says in our circles at Micah, it's kind of a head to toe observation. Sometimes you can see more than what they will tell you, and so don't miss the opportunity that as you're building through these questions, there's opportunity to observe like what color or what do their eyes look like? What does their skin look like? There's just some really basic, obvious things that can tell you by the time you get to this question whether or not there's some things that maybe that they're struggling with that they may or may not even know that they need to be concerned about. And so this question is trying to gauge on a 5 point scale, how much is someone struggling with a variety of chronic health issues. What conditions do they have? What things are you observing that seem like they could be an issue that might not be overly obvious? When's the last time they saw a doctor? Where do they go when they need to see a doctor? I oftentimes think you can tell a lot based on how much someone is or isn't willing to um, or whether they're using the emergency room as their primary care physician or whether or not they are um, or whether or not they are even seeking medical care for different things that seem obviously a challenge or not. Um, and so you're really just trying to get with this section a, um, a, a read on what are they medically or mentally struggling with? What are they doing about it or not? How does it affect their daily life? Um, and what are some of the things um, uh, that that might pose a challenge to them being able to participate in the housing process and then manage thereafter. And I think again, you're hearing us say a lot, like reassuring people, we're not asking these questions because it's going to disqualify them. We're asking these questions because we want to understand how we can best support them in the process of getting them out of the homeless situation that they're in, and into some level of greater stability. One of the things I think that's really important as you begin to get into some of the health questions is sometimes the most direct way of asking the question is not the way that you're going to get the best answer. So examples of that would be not saying, well, what does your doctor say about that? It's like, where do you go when you need to see the doctor? Asking open-ended questions. One of the best examples that I learned many years ago is don't ask people, well, do you have a brain injury? Well, how many times have you been hit in the head? Because there are different things that that people will respond to, um, that may not be overly obvious, or they may not even know that they're struggling with. So I'll stop there and see, are there any questions or anything to add with regard to chronic health conditions?
Not a question, but I will just add, some of this might also be reflected in the parenting in terms of connections that the kids might have to some of these services. If they have access to testing for developmental disabilities or any chronic issues. And so you might see it reflected there as well as here. But just that's a great kind of topic to keep in mind when you're focusing on what supportive services the kids in the household might need, and how that might be a hindrance to a family accessing or maintaining a permanent housing option.
Okay, so to move on then, so you've had a conversation with them about, their conditions, known or unknown, your observations, realized or not. And then you're gonna drift into, well, what kind of utilization of services that are they, how are they participating with emergency services? Um, this one to me is a little bit of a tricky one because sometimes the most vulnerable people I know are not leveraging emergency services in the way that we might generally think. So for instance, they may be having a lot of mental health issues, and it may not be the emergency room that they are interacting with, or mental health services, but they might be getting arrested a lot. Or so I think it's a comprehensive understanding of trying to understand, like, how are they interacting with the hospital? How are they interacting with other service providers? How are they interacting with the police, as a comprehensive understanding of what it is that of how their conditions are contributing to their daily functioning. And so you want to ask questions like, how many times have you been to the emergency room in the last, 6 months? Leave it at a limited period of time. Does the ambulance pick you up often? You ever stay in the hospital overnight? And I would not, when you talk about police contact, um, it can really be, it's not necessarily how many times have you been arrested, but how often are you calling 911? How often are you interacting with the police? Did the police give you a hard time? Again, these are guiding questions to try to get an understanding of what their daily life is like. And so you want to try to understand what it looks like for them to access emergency services. Do the emergency services find them? do they find emergency services? And both can tell you a lot about how how they are able to manage their own needs, which to me is really what this is getting at. You can have both extremes of people who are people who are not accessing services on their own, but they're interacting. They're constantly having people tell them to move on from place to place. They're constantly having the police or the ambulance called by concerned passerbyers or things like that. And then you can have the other extreme where they're calling 911 5 times a day, and they're overly utilizing emergency services, which doesn't always mean that it speaks to a vulnerability, but it doesn't always mean that they have the most pressing concern that they have, but it does speak to something that is going on with them and the coping skills that they have to be able to respond to that. So, any questions or anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I'd like to add a little something from a DV standpoint. So, a lot of times, contact with law enforcement in our cases are not a bad thing, because they call 911 for protection. So, what we see is the number of calls that they've made on behalf of the domestic violence happening in the home, um, that would rise to the top, that they've called law enforcement numerous times. Law enforcement, for whatever reason, a lot of times the victim is fearful and they won't disclose what's really going on in the home. And then we also have to tread very lightly when we talk about interaction with law enforcement, because there's a misconception in DV victims that we just want to get the abuser arrested, or we want to get involved, we want to work with the court systems, we want to do all these things. And that's a little off-putting to domestic violence victims until they realize that we built that relationship of safety and trust. So with the interaction with law enforcement, we use it as a good tool to help us determine how many times emergency services have responded to the house due to the domestic violence.
Thanks, Daphne. Um, so once you've understood their health issues, understood how they interact with emergency services, you're then going to dig a little bit deeper into what are their daily life, what does their daily life look like? So the way I would approach this kind of question is I'd start with something like, well, what did you do today? What did you, you know, what did you have for breakfast? Where are you going to go today? I would just try to get them to paint you a picture of not just what they are able to do for themselves, but also what their plans are for what their day is going to look like. Trauma has a way of shortening the amount of time by which we gaze into the future. We see with a lot of our folks that have been on the street for a long time, they are not thinking about anything other than the next hour. Um, um, and part of the healing process then becomes how do we lengthen that to can we have a plan for tomorrow? Can we have a plan for next week? Can we have a plan for and so I think some of what you're getting at with this question is trying to understand what their day looks like, how they are managing the things, how far into the future they are looking at, and then trying to understand how well they can handle things on their own. Some of the indicators are how well they remember things. As you are going through this conversation, you are going to observe things that if are they easily distracted? Are they having trouble recalling key information as you're trying to understand what's going on with them? By the time you get to this question, you will have had an opportunity to see and understand how well they are functioning or not. Another indicator is if they don't manage their own money. That is an indicator. Or how fast they spend their money, or as you understand income, understanding do they what are their money habits? Do they come up with just enough to get through the day and then it's gone? And understanding their money management habits is an indicator of functioning. um you know how often do they feel like they need help filling out a form, making an appointment? Do they can they another good question when it comes to navigating systems is how often do you um how often do you lose things? And that can be a phone, an ID card, um, things like that. Um, are there other people in their lives that do help them? Do they feel like they can do things on their own? And so, with your function in question, you're really trying to gauge how much support, as we look to move them into housing, are they going to need in the grand scheme of um, of functioning from day to day. So, any questions or additions on that? And I think last but not least, perhaps my favorite question, is the question about support network. I know I'm probably a broken record at this point, but I fundamentally believe that people become homeless when they run out of relationships. And so understanding the support system that people have, as you've kind of come from, the outside in to the inside out, and just trying to understand how do they exist in the world. Who do they have to accompany them? Is there somebody from a church? Is there somebody from your organization? Do they have any family? Who is out there um, that can help and be a part of helping them to stabilize in permanent housing when it comes time to do that? One of the best questions, I think, that this is a good point to ask, that is, if something were to happen to you, who do you want me to call? In our world, there is oftentimes our folks have a very difficult time naming an emergency contact. Sometimes that is not us. And so getting to the root of not just who can help you with things, but who are their people? Who are the people that, if they're having a problem, that they might call in order to achieve the things that they need to achieve. It's also a good opportunity to tease out, like, do they have family out there? Do they want help calling that family to try to, can they go stay with that family? Are they estranged from that friend or that family? Um, what kinds of support what do they need to do before they feel like they can reach out to those people? The other end of the spectrum, and Daphne's done a good job of really emphasizing, where relationships may or may not be healthy. I think it's also important to notate when you're exploring the social support system, just because somebody has a person, whether it's a spouse, whether it's somebody they've buddied up with on the street, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a helpful situation. A lot of women on the street will buddy up with a male in order to have protection, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a healthy, reliable support system that's going to help them to navigate the things that they have to navigate in order to, and in fact, it can be not helpful. So I want to caution that just because people can name people, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have support systems. So really teasing that out, what this question is really trying to get to is, who are their helpers? Do they have any? Are there people that that are in their lives that are harmful? Are there people in their lives that are helpful as they begin to try to unravel the complicated situation that they're in? So, any other comments or questions on that?
So Megan, I'll go ahead and tap on that. Thank you for that piece. So with our shelter staff uses "where are your people" to ask, where are your people? Because at the end of the day, obviously your abuser is not your people, even though he's tried to convince you time and time again that he is the only person in your world and should be the only person. So one of the things that happens when they're in shelter is they talk about reconnecting, now that you're no longer with your abuser, or your abuser is in, jail for the domestic violence. What does it look like for you to reconnect with those people? So, those are conversations that we have ongoing, because family can be very supportive, if not for the domestic violence. So, after the family does realize that they're not going back for the, five, six, seven time, then there is the possibility of them reconnecting with family, relocating with family. So those are conversations that we have from the beginning about where are your people, and what is it that we can do to help you get back into that relationship with your support people.
Thank you, Daphne, and thank you, Megan, for walking through those. If anyone thinks of any questions, and we've kind of moved on from a section, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll make sure to revisit them at the end. We also have a note here regarding flags. So we know, of course, these questions are not all encompassing, but to both Megan and Kate's points, we're really trying to drill down what are the most important factors about someone's circumstance that contributes to how vulnerable they are. And so there are some flags that many of you will be familiar with that are kind of a part of our current prioritization process that may or may not alter, right, someone's ultimate level of vulnerability. And Sam is going to talk a little bit about that. So I'll pass it to her.
Thanks, Megan. So I think in particular, I've gotten a lot of questions about flags. Most people do not know that we already currently use flags in our prioritization process. And so flags do a couple of different things. But overall, the way that I explain flags is it really helps to shine a spotlight to someone who maybe needs a little more focus or a little more conversation. So for me, I think of flags not necessarily as something that affects what their prioritization score is or what their vulnerability score is, but allows for us to say, I notice you, maybe I should look a little closer at what the overall picture of this person is. And so currently we do have 4 flags in our system. And so we've put those on here as well as adding one. So our flags that we currently have is chronic homelessness, terminal illness, a serious mental illness, a veteran, or a DV. And so I said that flags do a couple of different things, and you'll see those in here. Flags can tell us that there may be some eligibility criteria for someone who makes them eligible for more services than others. So for instance, someone might be eligible for a VASH voucher because they're a veteran, where the other person who is not a veteran is not eligible for that service. So when we're talking through case conferencing or helping to match people to the housing that might be appropriate for them, we look for the first veteran that is eligible on the list for VASH vouchers or SSVF or other veteran specific services. And so it helps us to really highlight those people automatically who might be eligible for those services. Now for the others, and so you'll have that same thing with DV and other things, but for the others, chronic homelessness, terminal illness, or even serious mental illness, it helps us to say, there's a lot going on with this person and we want to be able to have conversation. It also helps us with tiebreakers for people. If we have one spot and there's 2 people, all things being equal, is there a flag on someone that we can have conversation about who needs to move immediately versus not? So terminal illness is probably the easiest one to understand. We would rather someone die in housing than die on the street. So if you have a terminal illness, maybe we flag that person for a more immediate move into housing than allowing them to sit on our list and kind of be on the wait. So again, flags do not change their overall vulnerability. The questions and the conversation and the overall picture that you're painting in the above questions is their vulnerability, but really helps us shine light on folks who need additional conversation in that case conferencing portion of this entire process, which Megan's going to talk a little bit about later on.
Thank you, Sam. Any questions from the group on flags? Okay. So at the end here, you will see just a tally of the vulnerability points that each section has been assigned. So this final page really is just so you can have that all in one place. We have created this assessment inside of HMIS, and so that will be available. We tried to make it as straightforward as possible, going on you all's feedback to make sure that everything is going to be as easy to access as possible and easy to enter, that we're not adding kind of undue burden on you all as case management staff, knowing you have many things to be focusing on. We really wanted to take the tool and make it as simplified as possible. So we will talk a little bit more about kind of next steps and kind of the direction of where it's going, what the expectations are for utilization and all of that after we do a little bit of breakout session practice. It is 12:10 now, so we will just do about 15 minutes in breakout rooms. We're going to try to pair you all with folks from your own agency just to make that process a little bit smoother, so you can practice through. Our expectation really is that you're just kind of rotating through whoever else is in your breakout room and practicing just with your experience. You all have worked with many clients, you know some of the stories you've heard and kind of the cases that folks are presenting to you. So really want you all to be able to utilize this time, go through some of the sections, practice. So have one person in your group be the client, other folks be the case manager, projector and you can rotate that through. So Sam is going to break us into the breakout rooms now. If anyone has any questions, we can utilize the chat for that. The leadership staff from agencies will be in rooms with you all. So if you have any questions, and then when we are done with the breakout room, we'll come back here. We'll quickly go through any questions folks have, and we can take a look at what it looks like in HMIS as well. So we can bring that back in about 15 minutes.
Megan, you're muted.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Hope that the breakout sessions were helpful, gave everybody a chance to kind of take a look at the tool. We are right up at the end of time, and I want to thank everyone for joining, especially for a longer session. Really appreciate your time and attention. I want to show you all really quickly what the tool looks like kind of in practice. So we had some questions in breakout rooms about whether the tool will be available kind of on paper, is it in the system, things like that. So what is in the system currently for the tool is just the scoring. So you are welcome to print out the tool, handwrite it, whatever is going to be most effective for you. And as we mentioned as well, the notes, case notes, that is for you all as case management staff. The only thing that is going to be entered into the HMIS system is going to be just the number scores itself. So you can revisit the tool, you can start it with someone. If something pops up, you are interrupted, you can return to it. It's not going to it doesn't have to all be in one session, whatever's going to work best for your clients. So when you're in HMIS and you're in a program, so the assessment will be tied to all homeless programs, which is going to be encompassing of everybody on this call. You will scroll down to the kind of assessment portion once you're in the client's entry record for whatever that program is. You'll go past like a lot of the questions. Right under current living situation, you will see vulnerability assessment. That is the section that this will be included in. You will click add, and you can see the flags here, yes or no. And then all of the sections, it's just a numbered score. So you're just going to plug it right in there. Super simple, straightforward. It will not allow us to pre-fill an end date, but you can just put the same date that you're entering it. If they have previous assessments, you can see when you click on the pencil and pull it up, if you click on this little box, it will also show you if they've already done an assessment previously and what the score was, and then kind of where it put them. Any questions on the HMIS side of what it looks like, or any additions from other folks on the call?
Megan, if you'll just pull up the actual box again.
Yeah.
So for the actual number scores, if you need a reminder on what those matrix were, if you click on the actual title of it, those will come up for you. So you do not have to have that matrix in front of you. It is in HMIS for you. So if you're like, I don't remember what a 2 or a 3 or a 4 was, we've put those in for you. So it's really easy to do. Mostly what you would have in front of you is anything that you wanted to do to kind of make notes or help to guide that conversation. But the actual scoring matrix is in there for you. As Megan mentioned earlier, the only one that will allow you to put a 0 is parenting score. So if that area is no children, you can put a 0 for that. And then once you hit save, even on a new one, those green boxes will come up for you, and you'll be able to see the full history. We want to make sure that we're always adding new ones, not changing or editing old ones. We want to keep that history to figure out what those scores have looked like over time. We will use the information that's put in here to pull our prioritization score. So those are in there. One question, just real quick, that did come up in breakout sessions that I was popping in and out of about flags was serious mental illness flag. And what does that mean? Again, flags are about highlighting folks for additional conversations. Serious mental illness is one where it can actually do both of those things that we talked about. It can flag someone who's eligible for more services than other folks are, especially around RACSB services for PSH and things like that. It can also be, I want more conversation because of how they function. But the actual serious mental illness does not necessarily automatically make them vulnerable. You can have someone with schizophrenia who is completely functioning. You can have someone with schizophrenia who is absolutely not functioning. A lot of their functioning is going to show up in those other numeric scores. You'll see someone who's not functioning with the serious mental illness showing up in legal, in parenting, in chronic health, in their emergency services, in their functioning. So those are really about who they are as a person. The flag, again, just signs that spotlight to say, is this person eligible for more services than other, or do we need additional conversation to continuously allow for that case management feedback? So those are the two things that I just wanted to mention about this. We hope this is easy to use in HMIS, and if you ever have questions, let us know.
I have a question and a comment if you leave that up. So I started to tell my folks before we got kicked out of the breakout room. There is a place there, the third thing down, where you can indicate where it's you want this score to be applicable to the family list or the single list. Theoretically, like this, if it's the single list, they're not going to expect a parenting score. So correct me if I'm wrong, but if they choose single list, you would generally expect that score would be 0. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so then whereas if we're for whatever reason screening a family, which is rare, and we want them to be on the family list, we'd put family list and then we would score the parenting. The other thing is there a reason we have to put an end date? Or what does that actually do? Do you want us to just make sure we end date it if we do another one?
You do not have to end date it. HMIS, when you do a sub-assessment like this, requires the end date. It's undeletable. I tried. So I did not want end date on there. It just wouldn't let me delete it. So if you leave it blank, it's completely fine. The only one that I really want is the start date that tells me when you assess them, so that we kind of know the dates and have a date tied to the scoring, but the end date doesn't really matter.
Would you
About
want an end date? Would you want an end date if you add another one at a future date?
It doesn't matter. I'll just go by the start date.
Okay.
About prioritization list, the drop down, I think, Megan, if you click over the drop down, it has, never mind, I take it all back. Families and singles, one thing that we have talked about is sometimes what list do you want them to be on is complicated. They might be a single when you meet them, have kids temporarily staying somewhere else, or having kids staying somewhere else, but they're hoping to get them back, legally staying somewhere else, or just informally staying somewhere else. I and Megan don't want the complicated. We just want to know what list you want them on. So I would say, if it is someone who would like to be housed with their kids and considered for that, then make it the family list. Something I had played around with, and I'm happy to add if I'm kind of getting a consensus from this about whether it's necessary, is I had played around with, should we do family, singles, and both, so that we could figure out, they might want to consider their kids, that might not happen. So how does that look? So that they can be included in both lists. But we can work with that and figure out what that looks like as we kind of like go through the pilot and figure out what works best for folks. But you guys kind of figure out what list you want them under.
Yeah, and I think, oh, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, I was just going to ask one other question that somebody was sending me is there a reason? We've been talking also about adding engagement dates for the point in which we start working with somebody, and we're thinking we're going to do engagement date and this assessment at the same time. Is there a reason why they should have an engagement date and an assessment date? Or could the assessment date serve as the engagement date? Is that a hard question?
I mean, I think it depends on when you determine someone's been engaged. Most of the time from a path status, which is where that data element has originated from. Engagement means you have collected all the information that you need to collect in order to make some kind of next step determination for them. I would say if you're to the point where you're doing a vulnerability assessment, that you're there. So they would be the same date.
Right. But is there a reason data-wise why we need to do both?
I would say that depending on what kind of data you're trying to pull and why, then
You might want it.
yes.
Okay.
So for instance, if you're trying to figure out, there's really 2 points that that date is used for us. We do look at how many times did I have to interact with someone in order to get them to a point of engagement. Also, how long is it taking me to get them to engagement? How long have they just been kind of floating with me trying to figure out where they're falling? I wouldn't necessarily pull their vulnerability assessment to get you that answer.
Got it.
Yeah, and so I think that's a great point too. Some of the we recognize that the tool will likely change, right? So our goal, we would like to pilot this with 10 clients. And starting out for the pilot, we would like you all to do the assessment with 10 clients who you have already done the VI SPDAT with, right? So then we can go back and compare of what this looks like. Is it really reflective of the vulnerability that we're really trying to capture? And then what we will utilize this score for is we will have specific case conferencing around the folks that you are piloting it with, so that we can compare where they are on the current prioritization list, and make sure that the tool is doing really what we want it to do. I also will be setting up some time with some of you all for shadowing what it looks like when you're filling out the tool, making sure that folks are comfortable with Megan had mentioned we're going through the questions. We've ordered them in a really intentional way. And we've recognized that some of these things may change over time as you use them in practice. So we are open to any and all feedback to continue discussing that on kind of a systems level. So just be on the lookout for some emails from me about some shadowing time and how we can make sure we're supporting you kind of in the implementation of this. So as I said, the goal is for 10 people. And then we will continue to discuss it, any changes that need to be made going forward. Any final questions or thoughts or comments from anybody? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for your time. This training will be recorded. We will be posting it on the COC website, and I'll send it out to everybody in the group as well. And if anyone has any questions as they begin to implement things or things need to be changed, please let us know and we'll continue the conversation from there. So I'll be sending out some follow-up emails with future instructions and all of that as well. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate your time.